It's been about a year and a half since Bridgerton season 3 dropped, which means that enough time has finally passed for me to be able to address the interview that showrunner Jess Brownell had with Decider's Megan O'Keefe, where she explained the reason why she decided to strip the season of a very core friendship, the friendship between Penelope Featherington and Lady Danbury, for reasons that I found absolutely ridiculous when I first read the article last year, and I can now talk about it without screaming. Is this me rehashing old wounds? Yes, I apologize in advance, you all. But I also think that this is a conversation we need to have because sometimes Hollywood refuses to see pretty obvious threads between characters that serve their arcs in a way that resonates and work for said characters in the hearts and minds of the audience. And yes, I will like to talk about that because I do think that the Decider interview speaks to something that Jess missed about the relationship and connection between Pen and Lady D. Now, before I go into the rest of the video, heads up that I will be reading large swath of the article in question and also mentioning parts of the story/plot from the book Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is the fourth in the Bridgerton series and pertains to Pen and Colin's story. So just in case you still plan on getting to the book at some point and want absolutely zero spoilers, this is your heads up. And with that said, the interview, which was held after the first half of season 3 aired, had the interviewer ask Jess Brownell about the removal of Pen's friendship with Lady Danbury. Now, those who had read Romancing Mr. Bridgerton will be very clear on how pivotal a role Lady Danbury played in the relationship between Pen and Colin. Firstly, the book makes it pretty clear that Lady Danbury, who we know is a character that always commands the entire room and has never existed on the sidelines as far as we know, notices Penelope Featherington, the wallflower who tends to hang back from the rest of the crowd. She notices her intelligence and her wit and knows that there is way more to Pen than meets the eye, especially when by the time the story kicks off proper, Pen has well and truly become an old maid as far as the marriage mart is concerned. She is 28 at this point, with several seasons under her belt and not a match had been secured, and thus the rest of the ton had written her off at this point. A situation that Lady Danbury sees clearly, but she's also very much aware of Penelope's true charms that the rest of the ton seem to be ignoring. And it is at her behest and encouragement that the book sees Pen truly stepping out and blossoming beneath the stunned eyes of the rest of the ton. And whilst their interactions in the book was not the most earth-shattering, it still left enough of an impression on me and other readers because even before Colin states it out loud, the first person in the book who points out Penelope's keen intelligence and eye is Lady Danbury. The first person outside of Eloise, of course, who notices Pen's wit is Lady Danbury. So much so that she gives what can be read as a passing statement that she believes Penelope Featherington can totally be Lady Whistledown, but which I think was her subtly informing Pen that she knows her secret and approves. And this is also why she's very adamant that Cressida Cowper can absolutely not be Lady Whistledown when the latter tried claiming that she was and came to Lady Danbury for the reward money. Because unlike with the show where it is Queen Charlotte who is desperate to unveil Lady Whistledown and put out the prize as a result of it, Lady Danbury meanwhile did so in the books because she was a chaos gremlin who was bored and wanted to shake things up like gods. I love TV show Lady Danbury because she's played by Adjo and she brings such personality to the character, but book Lady Danbury was an absolute riot as well. Anyway, the reason why I thought it important to bring us back through memory lane is because I need us to have that in mind. Lady Danbury's role in the fourth book and how important she was to Pen, albeit briefly, as we then take in the Decider interview. Because after Megan O'Keefe questions Jess Brownell's choice to remove Pen's friendship with Lady Danbury from the show, Jess admits that it is for two reasons. The first is that we felt like we've watched 2 seasons of Lady Danbury being heavily involved in molding or shaping the main couple, and we wanted to give her a storyline that was more about her and not just her being an accessory on the sidelines to someone else's story. We wanted to put her more front and center, and honestly, that is a sentiment I can get behind, because yes, we wanted to see Agatha Danbury's story be properly fleshed out. I will never say no to that. My problem, however, is the fact that the way in which Lady Danbury's story was told in the season directly contradicts this statement. We cannot be told that there is a desire to not have her just be an accessory on the sidelines to someone else's story, when ultimately the storyline Agatha Danbury was given in the third season was still tied to someone else's story. Violet Bridgerton's. And I know this is because of the second reason that Jess Brownell gave, which is we also wanted to pick up the threads that were established in Queen Charlotte, which deepened her and Violet's backstory. So it felt nice to connect Violet and Danbury by bringing in the Marcus Anderson character, who both follows up on the plot about Violet wanting to tend to a garden, while also continuing to delve more deeply into Lady Danbury's backstory. And I don't know about you, but that totally invalidates her first point. If your goal is to not have Agatha Danbury be an accessory to someone else, and this is why you removed a pivotal relationship from the books because you want to put Agatha front and center, then you are definitely not doing that by having her share that spot with Violet Bridgerton. Like, make it make sense. We would still have been invested in Lady Danbury's side plot if it had simply been about her brother popping back in to see her, and we're able to see the cracks in their relationship, which builds until she has that explosive scene where she basically calls him out for having ratted her out when she was trying to escape from her impending marriage to Lord Danbury. But because Jess or the writers want to have a more cohesive story that still brings in the Bridgertons, they make the choice to kill two birds with one stone, even though, like I said earlier, it contradicts the excuse we were given for why we were robbed, and we were robbed of a friendship between Lady Danbury and Penelope Featherington. And this is the point where I will like to explain just what we missed out on and the interconnected themes that could have been explored in that friendship between Lady D and Penelope. Because there was quite the significant fleshing out of Lady Danbury's characterization in the show that we could have leaned into. I mean, it is good writing that is right there, front and center. Lady Danbury taking Penelope Featherington under her wing because she sees in Pen the her that was much younger, whose life had been spent for so long underneath the control and orders of her parents, and who had now reached the point in her life, remember Pen is now 28, where she's fully embraced the desire to step out of the shadows and live on her own terms, something that Lady Danbury wished she had had the chance to do when she tried running away until her brother gave the game away. I mean, it is right there. Just as the season worked in the connection of Lady Danbury's tension with her brother into the Violet storyline, they could have just as easily done the same with the Pen storyline, whereby Marcus's re-entrance into Agatha's world coincides with Agatha giving Pen the support she needs as she finds her own footing and steps out with pride amongst the ton, no longer a wallflower who wilts beneath their disapproval and silence. Something that makes Lady Danbury think and remember her own childhood. These are two young women who for the early part of their lives didn't have the agency to make the decisions that they wanted, and whilst Agatha had to wait until she was much older with a dead husband before she could start to call the shots in her own life, we could have had that hint of pride of Lady Danbury being able to see her friend and protege blossom and not be hindered by anybody, not her mother, not their world. And it would have been such a satisfying story where Agatha is helping a young girl the way she had wanted, hoped she would have been helped when she was that young. Jess watering down the power of their friendship is something that has stuck in my craw for the last year, because the reason given for it makes zero sense when you consider fully what we could have had, how it could have served Lady Danbury's story even more. Lady Danbury's inclusion in Pen's story in the fourth book didn't even center her coupling with Colin. So this whole statement about how Agatha had been reduced to basically fairy godmother status for the couples in the previous season, which I agree with, doesn't apply in this one, because if they had just worked with the threads available to them, her focus would have been on Pen and only Pen, with Colin not even factoring in for her. That would have been an active choice that she makes as well for herself, that isn't tied to her constantly spinning around the orbit of the Bridgertons because of her love for their grandfather, Lord Ledger. There was a non-Bridgerton centered relationship that we could have seen Agatha Danbury cultivate in the show that would have still tied to her own story, her own healing, and in healing herself, she also gets to help another young woman heal. We could have had that, and instead we were robbed. Doubly so for me, because I would personally have preferred Pen finding her confidence beneath the tutelage and care of Lady Danbury rather than it being tied to her love interest. Something about that just doesn't sit right with me. We could have had more. Plus, can you imagine the added drama and tension of Colleen Bridgerton being hit all at once with a Penelope Featherington who's not only changed her wardrobe and style, but had a total confidence boost and attitude change outside of him as well? It would have been so perfect and leaned further into the bit of his story where he really is being forced to look at this girl he's known all his life, his friend, who seems to have just changed in between the blinks of an eye through a whole new lens. That would have been such chef's kiss. We really could have had it all, because unlike some Bridgerton fans, I am not totally opposed to the idea of side stories and side plots. Like I've said in other videos, it helps me get really immersed in the world as we get to see all these characters outside of the main story, and we get to make full use of the ensemble cast. My position has always been that Bridgerton needs to streamline the side stories, trim the fat. We don't need 5 or 6 going at the same time with the main story. Maybe 2, max 3. That is enough. And one of those could have been Lady D's friendship with Penelope. Damn it. But who knows? Maybe you don't agree with me on this. Or maybe you have been snapping your fingers at the screen the whole time screaming, "Damn straight, Noria," which is the only time you're allowed to use straight and my name in the same sentence, of course. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. If you can't, however, do consider checking out my other channels. One of them is my gaming channel and the other holds my ASMR content. I have both linked in the description bar if either of them sound like something you might possibly be interested in. Whichever the case may be, however, I will see you on Monday with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love. Perfectly valid coping mechanism.